This channel is supported by TrueFire. TrueFire is an online library of lessons from some of my favourite players. There's thousands of lessons on there. You can use the promo code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of their courses.
Okay, so stemming from the video that I did the other day where Alec kind of highlighted to me Tim Pierce's board, and I noticed that on it there were a bunch of different multi-effects. I kind of thought that logically if you start going down the route of having multi-effects on your board, then naturally I think the tendency will be for the board to kind of shrink a little bit. And also, I thought that that was what I was seeing in people in general. So people like John Mayer used to have 3 massive pedal boards. If you look at his 2022 pedal board, touring with the Grateful Dead and on his own tour, things are much smaller now. And I don't know if that's partly to do with budget. I don't know. There's probably a whole bunch of considerations there. But I'm noticing as well, and it's probably been the case for a little while to be fair, that the small board has become a bit of a thing. But Brett asked me a question and I thought he had a point, and he sort of said, appreciate that, you know, people like you are gigging, but actually the majority of people that buy gear probably don't even gig. And so for those folks, some of the considerations around gear may not even be the same as people like me who might go out and play weddings and that sort of thing, or people that are in touring bands, or people that are, you know, doing fly gigs and all that. For a lot of people, and this is myself most of the time as well, I'm playing guitar in my bedroom, right? And, you know, a lot of people might be playing guitar in a basement, all this sort of stuff. And it led me down this path of thinking, because he said, for instance, I really like using a Yamaha THR or a Fender Tone Master, and I thought, okay, right. And then I had another conversation with Christopher, and he was saying, or asking me, you know, if you're not gigging, would you even buy a piece of hardware? And that is kind of, I think, an interesting thought. And I think it's now probably more possible than ever before to get a realistically enjoyable and pleasant experience playing with plugins than ever before. For instance, this time of year, Neural DSP have 50% off on their plugins if you're into that sort of thing. Yeah, Line 6 came out with their Metallurgy collection, which is a bunch of great stuff. S-Gear, Scuffum S-Gear, I finally tried that this year, and those are some really good things as well. And not only that, but also companies like Strymon this year kind of stepped into the VST plugin game. And I wonder if this is a trend of things that are going to happen more, because I think we can see from Neural DSP that sometimes the hardware thing doesn't necessarily go completely to plan. You know, it's especially in a time of a chip shortage and stuff. Developing a VST, I think, is probably a little bit more predictable, I'd imagine, and a little bit less costly than developing hardware. So, if the question is, I only play at home and I'm never going to gig, do I need a piece of hardware? Do I need something like an HX Stomp XL? Do I need something like an HX Stomp? Do I need a Fractal FM3? Do I need a Quad Cortex? I think nowadays the answer is actually kind of no. The thing is that probably a lot of us have quite good computers at this stage, so my computer over there isn't crazy specification, sort of around about £1,000 a couple of years back, which is the most I've ever spent on a computer, but I think is really only sort of mid-price. You're not talking about sort of gaming specs or anything like that. If you have one of those computers in your room, then for me, I think something like a mid-priced or even some of the lower-priced audio interfaces and a plugin or a few plugins could for sure get you a really, really satisfying kind of guitar experience, particularly if you need to be using headphones occasionally, you've got some studio monitors, this sort of thing. At some point, someone is going to have to crack this, because at the moment it's not happened. So if you think back to, I think it's Atomic, who came out with these kind of generic sort of FRFR solutions where you could slot in a pod, you could slot in various devices. They created something generic that could address the problem of making something like the Line 6 pod, like an amp modeler, easily and without too much work come to life. And we've seen a few of these examples. So this is the thing that I'm wondering about, whether this could eventually happen. Something sort of generic that can load a bunch of different VSTs so that we could get access to our plugins that we use at home with a computer live. And I don't know the format that it would take, but presumably it would also speak to a foot controller or whatever. Now, there's a few companies that have sort of nearly tackled this. There was one called Elk Audio that seemingly is now really more focused on the kind of live streaming sort of thing. And there's one other called Sea Lake Audio Station. And if you look at photos of this, it's something that looks remarkably like, I don't know, an Axe-FX or something like that, right? So it's a rack unit, which is essentially a computer which runs their own DAW that you can load VSTs into. So I feel like in the future, presumably, given that we are getting more and more comfortable with this idea that even things like this are essentially a computer, right? That we'll start to interface with these. And I think the actual experience of using the plugin is actually generally better than even the best kind of UIs, right? You have these kind of sort of layouts. You have potentially things like the Neural DSP plugins, which look quite inviting to use. The knobs look more like the real life thing. There is a name for this, isn't there? And potentially the signal chains are already optimized, and they might be quicker to build presets with, as well as, you know, there's plugins out there like Valhalla Supermassive, and, you know, now there's maybe even the Strymon Big Sky if you can get it to work. And actually also FabFilter, I checked out this Timeless 3 plugin, where the actual interface of the plugin is, I think, a little bit more elegant than you find in something like this. And so potentially you've got these plugins which are super, super powerful. You think about sort of the FabFilter EQ matching capabilities and all that sort of stuff. You think about how different plugin might look on a computer versus even on a quad cortex, which is sort of the most modern thing. The representations of this stuff, I think, is way more inviting in a plugin. So for me personally, I'm interested to think, certainly at home, I think if I was just practicing or just playing, then I could, I think, get by with a plugin. It might end up being in some ways cheaper than an HX Stomp if it's, I already have a computer and I already have an audio interface maybe. I think also you get slightly better experience, a bit more kind of that hands-on, that thing that feels a little bit like the real life unit. And I think I did a video about optimizing kind of your signal chain and your audio. So even with slightly cheaper audio interfaces, I think as long as the latency isn't super high, you can have a really good experience, and there's not actually too much to it. They're not super complicated things. So let me know your thoughts. I think that's the question for me. If I wasn't gigging live, would I only use plugins? And I think I'd certainly experiment with it if I didn't have a piece of hardware. For me, you know, the computer can be always on anyway, anytime that I'm playing guitar, so it wouldn't necessarily take anything away. You know, if I pull up Helix Native and pull up the same tones, the only thing that I don't get out of Helix Native that I would get out of one of these things is that these have a looper, and also then the foot control-y stuff, which this is what I mean. Like if you had a piece of generic hardware that could run lots of these plugins and stuff, I think I've got to imagine it would work quite well for quite a lot of people, and people would be open to trying it, I think, depending on how expensive they were. But so the C-Lake audio station is a real thing that does exist. I don't know if anyone has actually heard of it, but presumably this kind of thing could work. So do you need an amp in 2022? I don't think so. Do you need hardware? If you're not gigging, I don't think so. I think you can definitely have a really, really good experience, possibly sometimes better than with hardware with plugins. And I think at some point there will be a stage where there will be a legitimate way that you could gig these things live. And for some people, you know, if you have a pretty decent laptop, I imagine, Christopher, if you're watching, I think some people do even gig these things with some degree of success. So it's more possible than ever to get by without even hardware or an amp than ever before. And I wonder if in future there might be a bit more of this. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and do you know examples of this stuff that can work? I'm always interested to sort of hear about this stuff and read about it from people that might try it or not. But again, if you don't have a reason that you need to take the sounds out of the house, then I think plugins are actually worth exploring, especially now that I've got a computer that can run them. So I guess you could do a trial with most things to see if your computer does work in that way. But yeah, let me know your thoughts.